Let's get started with part 4 of this Postgres tutorial. At the end of part 3, we had one table for products with a few rows. We can write this select query to see the data in the table and then run it. We see the results here. Let's say that we want to capture the suppliers for each product, which are the companies that supply the product for our fictional company that we are making this database for. We could add a new column for the supplier. It could look like this. We have the supplier name column and put the name of the supplier here. However, this has some issues. We could have many products with the same supplier. If the supplier changes names, we'll have to update it for many products. There's a risk that we'll miss one and the product will be with the old supplier. If we remove a product, we will also remove any record of that supplier. We also can't capture any other information about that supplier. So what's the solution? We should create another table in our database to store a list of suppliers. This would mean we have a single place where each of our suppliers are stored. Then we would match our products to the relevant supplier record. Let's do that now. We'll start by creating a table for our suppliers. We'll leave it simple for now with just the supplier name. We run this and our table is created. Next, we'll insert a couple of records into it, one for Calvin Klein and one for Nike. We write these insert statements and run them. The data is inserted. Let's select from the table to see what it looks like. We can see our two rows here, Calvin Klein and Nike. If you want to get a quick reference guide for many common SQL commands and features, and stop forgetting the syntax for SQL, you'll love the SQL cheat sheets I created. Get your copy at the link in the description. Here's what our data looks like at the moment. We have added our product table with a few rows and our suppliers table that we just added. This might make sense to you, but you might be thinking, how do we relate them? How do we know what supplier each product has? Well, here's where we come to one of the foundational concepts of a relational database, and that is the concept of relating data between tables. We have two tables and they represent different things. To relate them, we add a column into one table that refers to a specific record in another table. We need to link each of our products to a single supplier. To do this, we need a way to identify the supplier. We have one column in the supplier table, which is the supplier name, but we shouldn't use the name as an identifier because the name could change and there could be more than one supplier with the same name. We need a column that can be used to identify a row. This is a concept known as a primary key. One way to solve this is to add a new column that will have a unique ID value which can be our primary key. We can call this the supplier ID. Then in our product table, we add a new column that records the supplier ID for each product. This is a concept called a foreign key, which means it is a column that refers to a primary key in another table. We'll also call this column supplier ID. We've given the same name to both columns, but they don't have to be the same name. Our code and database will still work if both columns have different names. So how do we make this happen in our database? We need to alter both of our tables to add these columns. Then we need to run an update statement to update our existing records to add values for these columns. Let's do that now. First, we'll alter our supplier table to add a new column called supplier ID. Like the last lesson, we could do this just as easily if we added this column in our create table statement. However, we can use this alter table statement to change an existing table. We run this and our table is updated. Let's update the data. We'll set the ID to 1 for the first row and 2 for the next row. We run these and the row is updated. Here is what our table looks like now. We have two rows, but we now have a supplier ID column. Let's make changes to the product table now. We alter the product table to include the new supplier ID. Now we can write some update statements to add the supplier ID to these rows. We set the supplier ID to 1 for the jeans product. If you remember, supplier ID 1 refers to the supplier called Calvin Klein. Then we set the supplier ID to 2 for the running shoes and t-shirt products. This supplier was Nike. We run these statements and they are successful. Let's see what our product table looks like. We run this select statement and see our results here. The jeans product has a supplier ID of 1 and the running shoes and t-shirt have a supplier ID of 2. The other products have a supplier ID of null, which is the default value when we add a new column but don't update the value for it. So we've added a new table for suppliers and specified which suppliers relate to each product. However, we've got 2 select queries now, one for products and one for suppliers. What if we wanted to get them in a single result, such as seeing the product name and the supplier name? This is possible and it's actually quite common. We use a concept called a join, and we'll learn all about that in the next part of the tutorial. Thanks for watching.